Greenland is becoming the most contested territory on Earth, and almost nobody is talking about what that actually means. Right now, as you watch this, military satellites are repositioning, undersea fiber optic cables are being rerouted, and at least 3 of the world's most powerful governments are quietly rewriting their Arctic strategies around a single island. One island that most people still picture as a frozen, empty wasteland sitting uselessly at the top of the globe. That image is wrong. Dangerously wrong. And by the end of this video, you will never look at Greenland the same way again. Here is the problem. For decades, the world treated Greenland as geographic background noise, a blob of white on the map, enormous in size, irrelevant in importance. But that version of Greenland no longer exists. The ice is retreating. The coastlines are shifting. And what is being exposed underneath is something that geopolitical analysts describe as one of the most extraordinary concentrations of strategic value on the planet. And in a moment, you will see exactly why that changes everything. Let's start with the basics, because the scale alone is staggering. Greenland covers roughly 2 million square kilometers, making it the world's largest island. It sits between the North Atlantic and the Arctic Ocean, directly above the shipping lanes that connect Europe, North America, and Asia. For most of modern history, the ice sheet covering 80% of the island made it effectively impenetrable. So, the world looked elsewhere. That was a reasonable calculation, until it stopped being one. Climate research from institutions tracking Arctic change indicates that Greenland's ice sheet has been losing mass at an accelerating rate since the 1990s. Some estimates suggest the island is now losing hundreds of billions of tons of ice per year. That is not just an environmental story. It is a territorial one. Because every meter of coastline that thaws reveals something. Fjords that were impassable are opening. Ports that could not exist are now becoming viable. And beneath the rock that the ice was sitting on for tens of thousands of years, there are minerals that the modern world is absolutely desperate for. And here is where things get strange. Greenland is believed to hold significant deposits of rare earth elements, the materials essential for electric vehicle batteries, wind turbines, advanced defense systems, and consumer electronics. Reports from geological surveys suggest the island may contain some of the largest untapped concentrations of these materials outside of China. And right now, China controls roughly 80 to 90% of the global rare earth supply chain. That single fact has sent a cold shock through Western capitals. Because whoever gains meaningful access to Greenland's subsurface resources gains leverage over the industries of the future. And in a moment, you will understand why that leverage is worth fighting over. If you enjoy these deep dives into maps and hidden geopolitics, consider subscribing. There is a lot more where this is coming from. Now, Greenland is technically an autonomous territory of Denmark. It has its own parliament, its own government, and a growing independence movement. The roughly 57,000 people who live there, most of them Inuit, have been navigating a complicated relationship with Copenhagen for centuries. Denmark handles Greenland's foreign affairs and defense. Greenland handles almost everything else internally. It receives a substantial annual subsidy from Denmark, roughly $500 million per year, which covers a significant portion of the island's public budget. That subsidy is the thread that holds the formal relationship together. And several major powers have noticed exactly how thin that thread is. The United States has maintained a military presence in Greenland since the Second World War. Thule Air Base, now called Pitufik Space Base, sits in the island's far northwest, and it is one of the most strategically positioned military installations on Earth. It provides radar coverage across polar flight paths, hosts ballistic missile early warning systems, and gives American forces a foothold within striking range of the Arctic. For American defense planners, Greenland is not just useful. It is, as some military analysts have described it, effectively irreplaceable. And in a moment, you will see what happens when that calculus becomes public. In 2019, reports emerged that the United States government had floated the idea of purchasing Greenland outright. The proposal was dismissed publicly, and rather bluntly, by both Danish and Greenlandic officials. Denmark's prime minister called it absurd. But here is the part that people missed. The idea of acquiring Greenland was not new. The United States had actually attempted to purchase the island from Denmark in 1946, offering $100 million. That offer was also declined. The fact that the idea resurfaced more than 70 years later tells you something important about how durable the strategic logic is. And it tells you something else, too, that the competition for Greenland's future was not going to stay polite. Because it was not just the United States watching. Russia's Arctic strategy has been explicit and well documented. Moscow has reopened Soviet-era Arctic military bases, expanded its icebreaker fleet to the largest in the world, and staked territorial claims in the Arctic seabed that overlap with zones other nations consider international waters. Russia understands, perhaps better than anyone, that control of Arctic access routes and resources is not a long-term ambition. It is an immediate priority, and Greenland sits directly inside that calculation. China's involvement is subtler but no less deliberate. In the years since 2010, Chinese firms and state-linked entities have reportedly expressed interest in mining concessions, infrastructure projects, and port facilities in Greenland. Some of those proposed investments raised enough concern among Danish and American officials that they were effectively blocked or discouraged through diplomatic pressure. But the interest has not gone away. It has simply adapted. Chinese analysts write openly about Arctic access as a strategic imperative. Some Chinese government documents refer to a future Polar Silk Road. Greenland is a central node in that vision. And here is where it gets genuinely complicated. Greenland's own people have a voice in all of this, and that voice is getting louder. The independence movement in Nuuk, the island's capital, has been building for decades. Many Greenlandic politicians argue that full independence from Denmark is not a question of if, but of when. The problem is economic. Greenland's economy is heavily dependent on fishing and the Danish subsidy. Without that subsidy, independence requires an alternative revenue source, and the most obvious candidate is resource extraction. Mining, rare earths, oil and gas, which means the path to Greenlandic self-determination runs directly through the very resources that global powers are already competing to control. Think about that dynamic for a moment, because it is genuinely wild. A small indigenous population, pursuing the entirely legitimate goal of political sovereignty, finds itself sitting on top of a treasure chest that three of the world's most powerful nations want access to. Their leverage is enormous. Their vulnerability is equally enormous. And the decisions being made right now, in Nuuk, in Copenhagen, in Washington, in Beijing, and in Moscow, will shape what Greenland becomes over the next 50 years. Here is the plot twist that almost nobody in mainstream coverage is discussing. Greenland's strategic value is not just about what is under the ice, it is about what is over the ice. The Arctic atmosphere and the space above it represent some of the most contested airspace on Earth. Polar flight routes, the paths commercial and military aircraft take over the Arctic to cut thousands of kilometers off transcontinental journeys, pass directly over or near Greenland. Satellite ground stations in the Arctic have unique coverage angles for polar orbit systems. The island's geographic position makes it a natural platform for surveillance, communication, and early warning infrastructure. This is why Pituffik Space Base exists. And this is why any discussion of Greenland's future is simultaneously a discussion about who controls the military geometry of the Northern Hemisphere. Climate change is accelerating all of this. As Arctic sea ice continues to decline, the Northwest Passage, the shipping route through the Canadian Arctic, becomes increasingly navigable. The Northern Sea Route, along Russia's Arctic coast, is already being used commercially. Both routes dramatically shorten distances between major global ports. And Greenland sits at the intersection of both. The island's ports and coastal infrastructure, if developed, could become critical waypoints for the next generation of global shipping. Analysts at maritime research organizations estimate that Arctic routes could reduce transit times between Asia and Europe by up to 40% compared to traditional southern routes. That is not a minor efficiency gain. That is a restructuring of global trade geography. What this means, practically, is that Greenland is no longer just an island. It is a choke point, a resource vault, a military platform, a diplomatic battleground, and home to 57,000 people who did not ask to be at the center of any of it, but who are increasingly aware that their choices matter more than ever before. The myth that needs to be retired, once and for all, is the idea that remote means irrelevant. For most of the 20th century, Greenland's isolation was treated as synonymous with unimportance. But isolation, in the 21st century, has inverted in value. The places that the world's infrastructure had not yet reached are now the places everyone wants to reach first. The ice sheet that made Greenland inaccessible was also protecting it. As that protection melts, so does the island's invisibility. What comes next is genuinely uncertain. Greenland's government continues to navigate between Copenhagen's authority, Washington's strategic pressure, and the aspirations of its own people. Debate continues about specific mining projects. Some have been rejected by Greenlandic voters, others remain under review. The balance between economic development and environmental protection of the island's extraordinary landscapes is deeply contested internally. And globally, every major power with Arctic interests is running the same calculation. Who moves first? Who builds relationships now? Who positions themselves for the decades ahead? The contested territory story is not just about Greenland. It is about what happens when the geography of power shifts, when a place that was peripheral becomes central, not because it changed, but because the world around it changed. Greenland did not move. The ice did. And when the ice moved, it revealed something that the entire planet is now scrambling to understand, claim, and control. By now, you should see why the frozen island at the top of the map is anything but frozen in the geopolitical sense. Every headline about Arctic sovereignty, rare earth competition, military repositioning, or indigenous self-determination connects back to this one extraordinary place. And the story is nowhere near finished. If this video gave you a new perspective on Greenland and the hidden forces reshaping the Arctic, hit subscribe so you never miss the next deep dive. Leave a like if you made it this far. It genuinely helps. And drop a comment answering this. Do you think Greenland will become more important in the future? One sentence is enough. The debate in the comments is always worth reading. All sources and additional context are linked in the description below.